welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, my colleague Russell Berger, attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about payroll when you have multiple employees in multiple states. So a question that we've gotten a lot since remote work and since employers are hiring more employees from different states, or maybe folks are commuting more from one state to another, is what do I do about my payroll practices? How do I handle that? And I know we've talked about on here a couple of times, just different things you need to consider when you have different employees in different states. But what are some things people should keep in mind as it relates to payroll laws and that area of things, Russell?
Yeah, well, the starting point is that each state is going to have their own law saying kind of when someone is an employee in their state. Um, so I know I'm kind of giving the traditional lawyer answer of it depends. So I'll try to be a little more concrete than that, which is when you have employees working in different states, or an employee that was in Maryland but is now working remotely in Pennsylvania or Virginia, DC, wherever, you should look into the law, and you should take a beat and check it out and talk to your payroll provider about the process for switching them, and then also kind of exploring what that entails, because that can mean not only changing over wage deductions like unemployment and taxes, but it's also going to implicate, beyond unemployment, it's going to also implicate workers' comp. It could implicate which wage law applies. It could change, other issues like whether you're subject to prohibitions on non-competes. So there's a lot of things that can change, and frankly, some of those laws have different triggers for what it means to be an employee of that jurisdiction, because they're not all written at the same time in the same way, just to make this super confusing.
Yeah, and something to consider too is that a lot of employers in states like New York or New Jersey, or here we're in Maryland, Maryland and DC, that there's a lot of employees that go from state to state on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, a monthly, and it's a little bit more tricky to all the things you described, Russell, as far as where are they employed, what are the tax implications, what are your obligations from a compliance standpoint, because if that's constantly happening, and we see it a lot here on the East Coast where things are close to each other, like New York and New Jersey are so close to each other, and New York City is a big hub, DC again as an example, as opposed to if you're out west and maybe the state is much larger, and that's much more unlikely that you would be, an employee would be going from one state to another. But we see it here a lot, and that's something to consider, as well as the amount of time. And there's different tests, there's different state tests related to that, and so it's just something to really keep an eye on. And if that starts happening frequently, to take a look and see what your obligations might be.
Yeah, I mean, it's another related point is, and we find this with a lot of technology-based companies where they've always been remote and hire employees all over the country. If you're doing an employee handbook, you probably need to do a state addenda for each of those states, because there's going to be nuances, not just with respect to things that come out of the payroll, but things like, uh, like vacation days, sick leave, jury duty leave. I mean, there's a whole number of things that are going to change state by state. And they might not be all that different, but you ought to be conscious of what you're stepping into. And then, like we started this conversation, it also goes back to making sure that payroll withholdings are going to the right place, taxes are going to the right place, and that you're real tight, especially when it comes to taxes, or what you're doing on that.
Yeah, and sometimes payroll companies can help give you some guidance on that, but where it's more nuanced in some of these situations we've described, definitely something you want to make sure you're paying close attention to as well, or getting an attorney involved with, because payroll companies can get you so far on like the more straightforward things, but when it gets a little bit more complicated, definitely something you want to protect yourself. So, well, thanks, Russell, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.